This will be a people versus the establishment by-election.
It worked for Trump. Is it going to work for Farage?
I think it's harder in the UK. I think for a few reasons. Nigel Farage was in Washington, D.C. for the 4th of July 250 celebrations, and when he landed back in the UK, he made quite an announcement. After various stories about financial donations had taken a $5 million before he was an MP and the origins of that money, Nigel Farage gave a press conference where he said he was resigning as an MP only to re-stand as an MP in a by-election in his seat. So I saw Farage at the weekend. He was a guest of honour at a party for the 250th, a Redcoats party with some of his old Leave EU buddies. This is what he was saying.
What are we celebrating? We're celebrating 250 years of the first Brexit.
And he also, in that same speech, said a Reform UK win would be great news for America.
I can promise you that if Reform wins the next general election, we'll be coming over here and entering into a free trade deal with America that'll benefit both of us, and we're doing it.
Obviously, that now seems a little bit far away, the idea of Nigel Farage as Prime Minister, because he has to get through this by-election first. But, Jerry, do you see the parallels between the Trump playbook, the Farage playbook?
Oh, yes, without any question at all. It worked very well. Frankly, one of the main reasons Donald Trump, well, certainly one of the main reasons he was able to recover so quickly from the enormity and the appalling incident of January the 6th was because he was able to portray himself as a victim of kind of the establishment going after him. And to some extent that was true, that many of the cases, those legal cases that were brought against him, especially the one here in New York, the one in Georgia, maybe even to some extent perhaps the federal cases, they were overreach. They were kind of prosecutorial overreach, largely by Democrats, that Trump could easily portray as, quote-unquote, lawfare, as prosecutorial misconduct, as the use of the justice system to go after a political enemy. Well, lo and behold, what is Nigel Farage doing in Britain? He's saying he's not facing prosecutorial investigations, but he's facing a parliamentary investigation, certainly facing a lot of media scrutiny over his financial relationships, shall we say. And he's playing out of that playbook, saying, they're all after me. They're coming after me for political reasons. It's nothing to do. It's the establishment defending its territory. They're not really they're coming after me because they really hate you, the voters. If they can do this to me, they can do this to you. All of that is straight out of the Trump playbook. It's also worth saying, Katy, the Trump people really do see Farage as their kind of, as a sort of a mini-me, let's be honest, as a sort of cat's paw for Donald Trump in Britain. They love him. You talk to them. I talk to a lot of them. And in fact, just this week, this week when he resigned his seat in Parliament, I had a couple of them say to me, "Oh, what does this mean? Is he quitting? What's going on? Are we losing Nigel?" And I sort of explained that no, it was a kind of a political tactic to sort of escape from this scrutiny that he's been having, and they were relieved by that. So Farage is very much Trump's man. The only thing I'd say about that is, Trump is very fickle. Farage is enjoying the glow of the Sun King emanating from the Sun King right now, but Trump can withdraw that. We've seen that with other European leaders. We've seen it with Giorgia Meloni, who crossed him over Iran, and now she's public enemy number one. He kind of warmed to Keir Starmer right at the start of Starmer's prime ministership, and then fell out pretty quickly again over Iran. So, there's no appeasing Donald. You can't stay in his good books forever. You're going to fall out. So, and the other thing, obviously, that for Farage, it's a tricky game. Donald Trump is enormously unpopular in Britain. It's fine for him to come over here to the US and say to a MAGA crowd, July the 4th was the first Brexit, and this is a great country, and Donald Trump is restoring American greatness. But, that doesn't then go back to the UK. He has to tread very carefully, especially over issues like Ukraine and Donald Trump's lack of support for them. So, look, the question, I think, is whether or not it works. I mean, it did work. This playbook did work for Trump. As I said, I think it was one of the main reasons he kind of recovered from January the 6th, because I think of overzealous prosecutions, overzealous attacks on him, which sort of restored his standing with the Republican Party and then enabled him to run and to win in 2024. Is that same playbook going to work for Nigel Farage? I mean, first of all, this by-election gambit is looking like it's going to turn out to be a bit of a dud, with all the major parties saying they're not going to contest it. It worked for Trump. Is it going to work for Farage? You tell me.
I think it's harder in the UK. I think for a few reasons. Certainly, to your point, there's Farage mania more than there is for any UK politician I've discovered in Washington, D.C. As we've spoken about, people don't really know or particularly care who Andy Burnham is right now. But yet Farage, people's faces and Adam will light up when you mention him. And I think there is an affinity between the MAGA movement and Farage because they see Brexit as the beginning of the Trump movement and the same forces that led to that Brexit referendum, the same forces that led to Trump in the White House the first time around. So I remember going to the GB News party when they first launched last year in DC, and it was almost a rally. And, you had Caroline Leavitt, Trump's press secretary, you had members of the cabinet, and they were talking about Nigel Farage and Brexit as part of their movement. And I think with Donald Trump, he can be fickle. One of the things we reported this week with my colleague Max Kendix, who's just come out to DC, is Donald Trump actually called Farage in recent weeks when things weren't going well for Keir Starmer and called him to congratulate him. I think reading Keir Starmer's woes as this idea Nigel Farage is about to win big, be prime minister, that seems a jump away. And I think that another thing I've just noticed from being in DC after 10 years covering British politics is I think there are more checks and there's more pressure in the UK system than there is in the US system sometimes. So, for example, you had JD Vance laughed at a week ago for suggesting Watergate wouldn't be such a big story these days when it came to Nixon. But there was, as someone might say, a kernel of truth in this, in the sense that I think stories which, the UK media would focus on. So you think about the Peter Mandelson sacking, for example. I remember getting calls from the UK side saying, the pressure must be huge in DC on Peter Mandelson. There wasn't much of a story here. There was a huge story back home. And I think with Nigel Farage, with the rules around the commissioner, what they're going to investigate on standards, the fact that there's absolutely nothing to stop Nigel Farage beating a bin, then being investigated, then there being a recall petition, then having another by-election, all in that time with the journalists keeping going at these various transactions. I think, you look at the turnover of prime ministers, I just think they're going to keep chipping away in a way that I think it is harder for an anti-establishment party, as they're trying to claim to be, to shake off and use the Trump playbook.
Now, the other big difference between the UK and the US is that the UK now is a multi-party system. And in the United States, you have one party. So Trump was able to use the attacks on him to restore, as I say, to sort of restore his standing within the Republican Party, and then there was no alternative. And I know a lot of people, we know from the polling, and I know a lot of people who voted for Donald Trump in 2024 with a sort of, fingers crossed and, heavy heart and, holding their breath and all this stuff because they didn't have a choice. I mean, in Britain, if Farage does wane because of some of these attacks, the Tories, I think they've got lots of problems, but they've certainly room for them to come back. Maybe some reform voters might go back to Labour under Andy Burnham. Trump has never been popular in the country as a whole, but he's always been regarded by enough people as better than the awful alternative. Well, when you've got other alternatives, then that appeal isn't quite as strong.